Hi kids, hi boys and girls, Reed Williams here. Just a quick video about Stromberg 175s. I've rebuilt a lot of these things in my time and I'm beginning to find some problems with parts, so I want to go over it with you. But let me start from the beginning. I dry soda blast these things once they're disassembled, a bare body like this. I disassemble, jet out and everything, and I blast them with one of these. You get these at Harbor Freight. 4 boxes of regular old baking soda from the grocery store will clean both bodies. Don't worry about getting baking soda in little holes and orifices, because after you blast it, drench it in boiling water. The little nooks and crannies will release their baking soda because it is soluble in water. Does a great job. Now, when I rebuild carburetors, I'm not looking for a polished look. I just want to get them rebuilt. This is a good, solid rebuild. But a lot of people say, well, I don't know why you didn't polish it up, or blah, blah, blah. But this is what they'll look like after 6 months on the road anyway. But here's what I'll talk to you about. Parts are not what they used to be. These are diaphragms right here. And you can't see it on camera, but the O-ring part of it that sits in the top of the air chamber, right here, and meets with the corresponding surface in the body, forms an O-ring around here, a little tab right there, okay? Well, what happens is you get these parts, and I got these parts from Moss. You get these parts, and as you can see, this one's thin, the rest of these are thick, this one's very thick, okay? It is the relationship between the pin that's on the piston and the bore that is in the air cap. This is very finely machined. And it is this that aligns the piston in the throat of the carburetor. This piston doesn't actually touch anything anywhere except within the bore of the air cap. So when you use, and you'll blindly do this, especially amateurs will say, well, here's the part. When you install that part, it doesn't fit all the way down. So if you tighten the screws on one end tighter than the other, then it's going to kick this thing around inside this air bore. And a little bit of movement here, a slight bit of movement here, will have your needle possibly hitting your jet. So it's very important to understand this piston doesn't contact anything in here. It's only in this shaft right here. So you got to pay a lot of attention. This is correctly installed. It had a little bit of squish before the screws went all the way down. So this part is touching this part, which means that the alignment of this shaft is as they intended in the carburetor. Pay particular attention to this, because if you've got a newly rebuilt set of carburetors and you think you did a good job and they just don't run right, you might have a needle sticking on rubbing up on its orifice, or you might have the piston itself sticking. You know, they're supposed to drop. They should drop with a clunk. And if they don't, then you got a misalignment. Also, another thing to watch out for. You know, 20 years ago or 30 years ago, I'd rebuilt a set of these and I might be the first one that had any of this apart. But now, after all these years, you may have had 2 or 3 rebuilds on a set of carburetors. These tops of these carburetors may be interchanged. So if you find that you don't have an absolutely perfect action between the piston and, I'm doing this one-handed, between the piston and the top of the carburetor, then you may very well have either a nick somewhere in it, okay, a nick somewhere in it, or you know, you have a fault, and that fault could be the misalignment of the entire assembly, because when you tighten it down, it doesn't crush all the way down to where metal's meeting metal. This is the definitive dimension here, is when this touches. So pay close attention to that. You may also find that if you interchange one to the other, you might solve your problem, because if I'm not mistaken, I believe these items right here are individually lapped together. So there may be very small differences in the tolerances. So pay close attention to this. When you buy a carburetor kit, I suggest you go to Joe Curto because you'll get the right one. The thin one, this one will work. These thick ones give you this and you're in trouble. A couple more things. Always, when you're doing a rebuild after all these years, some of these carburetors are going to be 50 years old, you've got to replace the bushings. The bushings are really easy. They don't look like they're easy, but they are in fact easy. And they've got a little brass holder that keeps the little rubber O-ring in there. These things are sometimes hard to get out. I always buy from Joe Curto, so I get new items like this. And I take a very small screwdriver and make a slit, pry up a tab, grab it with a little pair of pliers, and out it comes. You've got to do this. You've got to do this after all these years. Now I have new throttle shafts in all for this, but the throttle shafts that came out of it, they had a good bit of wear on them, and they just can't be saved. This little bit of wear, compounded with the fact that the rubber part of the seal is going to be completely desiccated and dry. You've got to do this. It's not that hard. Mark the relative location of the throttle disc so that you get the throttle disc back in the right location. And the throttle disc is not squarely milled. It has a little bit of a incline on one end. This throttle disc only fits one way. If you get it in backwards, it's not going to seal right. So pay close attention to these two things. And if otherwise you are a pretty good mechanic, you ought to be able to do a really, really good rebuild. Now this particular carburetor had a fixed jet. I had to use an arbor press and a small socket, and this comes right out. Take a heat gun, heat this body up, a bare body, heat the body up until it's too hot to handle. And then right before you put it in the press, run an air hose through the orifice. That'll cool down the orifice. And with a little bit of pressure in an arbor press, that'll pop right out. And then you don't damage the very delicate underside of the carburetor. Because if you stack this up in a hydraulic press, every time you put a squeeze on the handle, you may be bending something here. This is very lightweight. And don't break this son of a gun off. If you break this son of a gun off, then you're going to have to drill these out real carefully and put in a very, very fine screw. And you'll upset the airflow there a little bit, but at least you don't have to scrap the carburetor. Only other things I can warn you about are this particular item right here has got a gasket, the diaphragm with the brass cup on it, and a gasket. There are three things in here. A lot of people think that the diaphragm with the gasket is the only thing that's on there. That's not true. You'll change the squeeze on the spring if you do that. So new gasket, the new diaphragm with its gasket. Oh, I lost focus. The new diaphragm with its gasket and another gasket, and that's how that comes together. And one final thing, the choke. If you take this completely apart, you might get this arm on 180 degrees backwards. Of course, the spring won't fit, but you may not know that. When you disassemble these things, and you have to disassemble them to clean them, make sure you get this on correctly. Of course, if you have it on correctly, then it won't operate. If you have it on incorrectly, it won't operate because it's not going to clock correctly when the throttle's opened. But you don't want to do it twice. So always make sure that the holes that are in the bottom are going to be, as you pull the choke, are going to end up being seen in this recess right here. A lot of people will get this disassembled wrong. The housing will go on correctly because it only goes on one way. But if you have it installed 180 degrees backwards on this crank arm, then this is not going to work. So if you look out for these things, here's the major thing. This gasket situation, this is a major problem. This is a major problem here. When the sides of the diaphragm are too thick, major problem. The second major problem for amateurs is they don't want to do this throttle shaft bushing and throttle shafts, but they are in fact very easy. Just use small tools and go slowly. Hope that helps. Please know I love you all. We're making some headway on the 69. I'm getting ready to pull the body off and paint it, and all of the sub-assemblies are ready to go. Of course, this is the carburetor set for it right here, the one that I have in this presentation. This is the carburetor set. Manifolds are all set to go. All my parts are, well, some of these are mixed up with the business, but most of my parts are all ready to go, so it should go together quite smoothly. So anyway, so that's the news from Hot Springs, Virginia. Please know I love you all. Hope you're having good luck on your projects. I'll talk to you soon with a paint video. Bye.